Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Joe Davich. I'm the Executive Director here at the Georgia Center for the Book. And on behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book and the DeKalb County Public Library, welcome to another one of our virtual author talks. As you know, due to the global pandemic, we've had to cease having our author talks in the auditorium of the Decatur Library. Our library system is currently closed, and we've turned to the online format. We thank you for allowing us into your home this evening so we can continue to share these great programs and these wonderful stories with you. We'd also like to thank the DeKalb Library Foundation. They are the fundraising arm of our library system, and they help us pay for things that are not covered by our tax digest. So our Take the Internet Home program, our 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten, they also pay for a lot of the activities that are related to the Children's Summer Reading Program. And this really helps continue our mission beyond what we do as a library system. They paid for the Zoom account that we're watching this event on this evening, so we'd like to thank them for giving us this platform to continue bringing great authors to you. Just a few things this evening. Please make sure that you are muted, just to make sure we don't get any background noise or any feedback on the call. And if you would like to ask a question after the presentation, feel free to raise your hand and Allie will recognize you, or you can go ahead and just type your question into chat and I will read it out during the event if that is easier for you. We'd also like to let you know that Allie has included in the chat and on the Facebook event the contact number for Eagle Eye Bookshop. Eagle Eye Bookshop is the independent bookstore that we've chosen this evening that has copies of Lindsey's book in. You can either order online or give them a call and order over the phone. Their number is 404-486-0307, and they are offering curbside pickup for those of you that live in the Decatur area, or they are actually sending books out by mail, and I believe it's free over a certain dollar amount, but do check that out and support a local bookstore and an author at the same time. Once again, I am very pleased to have Lindsey as our guest this evening. She attended the UGA School of Journalism, where she worked on The Red and the Black, like many great Georgia authors, including Mary Kay Andrews and a Pulitzer Prize winner Deborah Plant did years ago. She worked for the U.S. News and World Report and is currently the senior editor for digital storytelling and training at the New York Times. So basically she does digital reporting, and currently a story that she worked on won a Pulitzer Prize. Right now she has been embedded with the Metro desk working on coronavirus coverage, but we are pleased that she is going to be here to discuss with you her first novel, How to Bury Your Brother. This, of course, is a wonderful Southern story. Like many Southern stories, it's about families, dark secrets, and what you have to do just to survive trauma that's in your life. Mary Kay Andrews says you'll be immersed in Alice's journey, and Patty Callahan Henry says that Lindsey Rogers Cook is a radiant new voice in Southern fiction. So we are so very pleased to have her here. So please join me in welcome Lindsey Cook.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me here in my office. It's strange. I don't normally get to show people my office, but now you can see some of my favorite books right behind me. So I wrote How to Bury Your Brother when I left Georgia and moved to DC and eventually the New York area. And for me, in a lot of ways, it's kind of a love letter to Georgia. So it's such an honor to be with Georgians and among Georgians, even though I'm in New Jersey right now in my apartment. So this book is a sibling story, and that's really what made me want to write it. So the main character, Alice, she's extremely close to her brother, and they're very close as children, but he runs away when he's a teenager and she doesn't hear from him anymore. And despite that, she still feels that he knows her better than anyone else. They spent a lot of summers together playing in the creeks of Georgia, which I know I have many memories of that from my brother. Maybe you have memories of that as well. And she's really surprised to find that years later, she's attending his funeral, and that's the next thing she hears from him when she's in her 30s and he's in his 40s. At the funeral, she begins to wonder why, what happened. Is there any way to go back? Is there any way to learn more about where he's been? Is there any way to learn what her family might have done or what she might have done differently to prevent that from occurring. And she decides to kind of put that in the back of her mind. Later, when she's cleaning out her parents' house, she finds letters that he wrote to people in his life, and she decides to take the letters and deliver them. I always love books that involve letters, so if you do too, might be a great one to pick up. I was asked to do some reading though, so I'm going to do that. So the first section that I selected is from the funeral. So it's from Rob, his funeral. Alice is the main character, and she's dealing with a lot of different emotions at the funeral. I know a lot of us have been to funerals, probably, maybe everyone, and sometimes there are a lot of complicated emotions, and that's what she's wrestling with, the kind of grief, but at the same time, the regret over her brother. And we're meeting Alice just as the pastor comes up to give the eulogy. Sweat glistened on the pastor's forehead as he approached the podium. The same pastor who her brother had spent so much time imitating to her in church, laughing under their breath until Mara shushed them. The man had been old back then. It should be him in the coffin, Alice thought, before regretting it. She apologized in her head as he began with 10 minutes of listing the family's resume in the church. Bible groups Mara led, fundraisers she organized, instruction she gave at Vacation Bible School, how we wouldn't have expected anything less from a pastor's daughter. The pastor pronounced Richard, that's her father, a true servant of God, mainly because of the check he signed, Alice imagined. The pastor launched into a generic speech about trusting God's plan. Alice sighed too loudly, and her mother shot her a look. She'd heard the same speech 3 times before at other church funerals. It had prompted her to volunteer to give the eulogy in the first place, so that her brother could have something personal, no matter what her words would cost her. She tuned out and memorized the funeral pamphlet in her lap. Her brother stared at her from the photo as a teenager, holding the acoustic guitar she couldn't separate from him in her memories. Underneath, July 16, 1968 to August 27, 2007, stood out in cursive writing with his full name, Robinson Wesley Tate. He hated being called Robinson. Their mother named them both after literary classics, but he got the worst of it. Not that anyone would dare tease him in school. Now, the pastor said, Robinson's sister, Alice, would like to say a few words. Alice? She scooted out of the row past her mother. The preacher placed his hand on Alice's back and guided her to the podium, as if she might double over in grief, exhaustion, birth pains, or a mixture of all 3. She straightened her dress, the largest of her maternity clothes, which had been stored in the deepest entrails of her house, where they couldn't mock her with her misshapen uterus. The fabric smelled like attic with a hint of squirrel droppings. Thank you for that beautiful service, Pastor Perry, Alice read from her paper. On behalf of my family, I'd like to thank all of you for coming today and honoring my brother's life. She skipped over the next line, which she'd found in a eulogy template online. Rob was a son and a brother. The list was supposed to go on. A chef, or a father, or a neighbor, or a committed member of his community. A child of God, the website suggested, but that she had no idea. Rob was my older brother. I was always the deputy and co-conspirator in his adventures. In the summers, we spent a lot of time at our father's warehouse, building things with all the empty boxes. Rob would start planning at Christmas. He would draw up a blueprint using butcher paper he took from school. Our friends would help, but he always put me in charge of the most important section. One year we made Atlantis. Another year, the White House. They never looked much like the real thing, but we always had a lot of fun crawling through our creations. Alice chuckled awkwardly at herself, remembering the seriousness he brought to the project, the tingling in her stomach as he assigned the roles, fearful for a second that he would forget her. The swelling of pride when he assigned her the biggest part, like always. Alice's eyes found Walker, her husband, watching her carefully from the second row, questioning. Was this the same brother Alice acted like wasn't worth mentioning? The one she said she wasn't close to? A second too late, her friend Meredith joined in with her own laughter to break the room's silence. Alice looked back at the paper. Rob was creative and smart like that. When he was still in elementary school, our mother ordered a set of encyclopedias so that we could look things up for school. Rob would start a volume and read it like a book. One year, he read the entire B volume. It seemed like he knew about everything, how baseballs were made, bullets, Brazil, bees. I was young at the time and didn't realize the pattern until he had moved on to D. She paused and attempted to make eye contact with a few people in the audience, like she had learned in college in a required public speaking class. A lady from her mother's tennis group gave her an encouraging smile from the third row. A man near the back snoozed with his head resting on the pew and his mouth wide open. I always felt safe with him, no matter how crazy his adventures got. In the house where we grew up, our closets were connected by a crawl space that I was small enough to go through. I got scared at night and would open the door and crawl through to find Rob in his own closet, reading or silently moving his fingers on his guitar with nothing but a flashlight. He let me sleep in his bed, staying with me until I fell asleep. She could still summon it, the sense of security she felt as she drifted off in Rob's bed, her older brother still on the closet floor, quietly turning the pages, the dog a few feet away. She looked at her parents. Her father stared at his shoes. Her mother looked straight at her, not really seeing anything, with her head held a bit too high, probably regretting not pushing Alice harder to edit the speech. Maybe not letting her mother help had been a mistake, but she knew what would have happened if she had accepted the help. Rob would have become Robinson. Her real memories would be turned into the version her mother wanted to exist in the world, the one that never happened. Alice looked over the rest of the audience and willed one person to cry so she wouldn't have to. I had to take a lot of biology classes, and one of the first things you do is Punnett squares. A Punnett square determines the traits of offspring. For example, my parents both have brown eyes, but each have a recessive blue eye gene, so Rob got blue and I got brown. Since we learned of my brother's passing, I've thought often of those squares. The truth is, I wouldn't be who I am today, the ecologist, the mother, the friend, without him. My mother gave me her industriousness. My father gave me his level-headedness. But I have Rob to thank for my passion and for just a pinch of rebellion. She laughed again nervously at the reference to how the audience probably perceived Rob as a teenage troublemaker with uncut hair. Without trying, her eyes bounced again to Walker. He stared at her, but she could read his face clearly, as she could when he was caught off guard. Their eyes met, and in an instant, he checked his expression, wiped it clear. But she had seen it, hurt, betrayal. She could see him realizing Alice had been close to Rob, and she hadn't told him any of the stories, any of this chapter of her life. She could see him deciding that the tension between them during the last week was more than just pregnancy hormones and bad communication. It was the exposing of a decade-long lie. In an effort to get away from Walker, her eyes found the casket's polished wood. She opened her mouth to begin her next story about how her brother took over the school speakers with his high school band to sing her happy birthday in the style of the Beatles, but she couldn't make out the words. She pictured the adult inside the casket, resting on the flawless silk, the adult she couldn't tell one story about, the one she shared blood with, had thought she shared a mind with for so long. We weren't close. He was my everything. Weren't they both true? The tears came unstoppable. She blurted out, "Thank you," and stepped away from the podium. Okay, and then the next scene I have is a little bit later in the book. Alice and her husband have some tension in the book, partially over the fact that Alice has kind of kept her brother a secret throughout her relationship with her husband. They have some other disagreements as well, but I'm going to jump into a dinner scene with them. After Alice cleared up the plates and Walker, her husband, put Robbie to sleep, they lay next to each other in bed with the lights off. Alice stared at the ceiling, thinking about the box her uncle tried to take, the unopened letters, Rob, his words to their father, all the mysteries of her life stirring together into one black hole of unknowns. Had her mother sat in the sewing room, blinking as she focused on a stitch, too late at night, wondering these same questions? What could she have done differently with Rob? Had she wondered what to do about her own husband? Had she ever wanted to pack up and leave her life behind, to go hide in a little shack on the coast, if only for a night? Leaving was Rob Things, though. It was always her father's move, too, after a fight, a sudden business emergency in Memphis, or a game of golf that stretched from sunup to sundown. It was Walker's, too, with his monthly trips to D.C. For the last few months, he'd no doubt spent tangled in the hotel sheets with Brittany. Leaving was always the man's play, not Mara's, not Alice. Walker crossed the emptiness of their king-size mattress. The light stubble on his chin from his 5 o'clock shadow tickled Alice's face as he kissed her earlobe. Her body locked, and she struggled not to jerk away from his lips. She always hated how he responded to tension by reaching for her at the exact moment she wanted to be away from him, at the moment she most wanted to sink into their role as roommates and ignore the other parts. I'm really tired from all this stuff with Jamie today, okay? She pictured the photo of Jake zipped safely in her backpack before hating herself for connecting her rejection of Walker with a man she had never refused. Was Walker thinking about Brittany right now? How she would have been the one to roll over to kiss his cheek? Would things be different, warm, loving, if she were lying next to Jake, her college boyfriend, instead of Walker? Would sex be something she looked forward to regularly instead of a prescription pulled out in the worst moments of tension, a stent to keep the heart pumping when it was near giving up? Isn't the point of being off work to be less stressed, not more? Walker said, as if she were on vacation, instead of dealing with an ever-growing mountain of drama and family deception. Walker rolled over so that his back faced her. They lay in silence for a few more minutes. Alice replayed her mother's advice from last week. Are you satisfying him? Her mother had asked. Walker? He answered, already half asleep. Do you think you can ever truly know another person, even someone you're close with, someone in your family? Did I know my brother at all? Is it possible to feel you understand someone so deeply yet know nothing about them? She wanted to hear one person say it. Yes. He turned to face her again. What? His voice was sharp with anger. Too close to Rob, Alice thought. Nothing, she said. Never mind. Silence. Tell me a secret, Alice said. Something I don't know about you. It's almost midnight. Just a quick one. I secretly love green apple martinis, but I'm afraid to order them at bars. She chuckled. No, something else. The only fight I ever got into was in middle school because some asshole kid was calling my brother names. I went up to him on the playground and punched him in the face. He got knocked down and started bleeding all over the place, and we both got detention. What did your parents say? Alice said. My dad told me he was proud of me. Alice considered this. Now go to sleep. Walker rolled back over, and within 30 seconds, he was snoring lightly. Alice waited a few minutes to make sure he was asleep before she got out of bed. All right, so this is the last section, and it's a bit of a flashback to Alice's time at the University of Georgia. By the time Alice applied for college, her mother worried, no doubt, that Alice wouldn't find a husband at all. Her mother, and sorry, someone is angry outside, if y'all can hear that. Her mother invited the first eligible boy over for dinner 2 days after Alice turned 16, and she didn't stop until Alice packed her bags for college. Each time, Alice crossed her arms and stared at her plate, as if she could set it on fire. In reality, it wasn't the boys who irritated her, though they did. It was the Leave It to Beaver routine her parents put on for them, as if the dinners weren't the only time they ate as a family in all the years since Rob left, not acknowledging the truth that after Rob disappeared, they ceased being a family. He had somehow been the glue holding everyone together. When Alice packed up her bags for the University of Georgia, her mother rationalized the choice over Georgia State, where she could live at home, because it would be the, quote, perfect place to find Mr. Right. Not wanting to harm her chances of escaping the house at last, Alice only smiled and said, maybe, though her real plan was to spend all her time studying science and none of her time preparing for an MRS degree. There was one problem with that plan, though, and his name was Jake O'Connell. Alice first saw the problem while walking back to her dorm from her freshman literature class. The problem sat with his back against one of the trees that shaded the quad, where a group of fraternity boys played football. He wore faded blue jeans and a green t-shirt from one of the agricultural clubs, Birkenstocks lined up next to him. He caught her staring and winked. They waved at each other without speaking for the rest of the semester. Although it was Alice thought this was the perfect relationship. But everything changed the next semester when she walked into her resource conservation class, drew South Korea from a hat, and went to sit under the sign next to the window. She watched the students run into class before they were late. "Hey," said a male voice as a face popped into her field of vision. She jumped. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. Hi, I'm Jake." The boy from the quad extended his hand, smiling a quirky smile that showed slightly crooked teeth, surrounded by a neatly trimmed beard. 2 years older, Jake was a junior, studying international affairs with a focus on environmental policy. This class was his life goal, and he debated passionately for South Korea. So passionately that by the end of the class, their group won the competition. And because of the half-study, half-makeup sessions that filled Alice's semester, she ended up with an A and a boyfriend. Her sophomore year, with many nights of whispered secrets between them, Alice told him her biggest, about Rob, that she had never told anyone. It would forever intertwine the two men in her mind. That night, Jake and Alice lay outside on Myers Quad, trying to point out different constellations, or if they didn't know their names, making them up with ridiculous stories for how the stores were named. "Sometimes," she said, "I think I see him." She had told Jake about Rob, about her family, about how she had been sure he would come back for her, about the night she ran away and the years-long ripple effect that left her mother more protected than ever. Jake propped his head with his hand to look at her. "What do you mean?" The street lamps lit his outline, just enough for Alice to fill in the rest of his expressions from memory. "I'll be sitting in a room and I think I see him outside the window." She chose her words carefully. "I'll be walking downtown and think I see him walking in front of me, be at the grill and think I hear someone say his name. I know it sounds insane. I don't even know what he looks like anymore. I don't know if I would recognize him, but still, I can't stop seeing him." Jake didn't speak, so she continued, the words spilling from her mouth. "When I had trouble sleeping sometimes as a kid, he used to tell me I shouldn't be scared because angels were always watching us, taking care of us. Sometimes I wonder if that's what he does now, with me, from wherever he is. Is that crazy?" "I don't think it's crazy." Jake used his other hand to brush a strand of hair off her face. "I think it makes perfect sense." They kissed. She felt the wetness of tears as their faces rubbed together, but didn't understand why she was crying. "When we find him, you can ask him yourself," Jake said. It was all part of their plan for after graduation, to find Rob, to build a life together, one that included her brother. Even then, as Jake rubbed her arm trying to reassure her, Alice had to close her eyes to stave off panic. Unlike when she went looking for Rob in the canoe, with so many years between them, she feared what she might find, how she might feel, what she would say. She felt the prickler of anger, of blame even then, the rage that he would take off without even a sign for her. She felt what would surely be Jake's coming disappointment too. Jake seemed to have the solution at the ready, so sure he could fix her, only by locating Rob. But Alice knew her real self was beyond the repair even Rob could bring, and it was only a matter of time until Jake found out too. That's it on my reading. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lindsay. So I really liked how when you introduced the book, you talked about letters and how you enjoyed letters themselves. And it got me thinking, and there's been a lot of articles written on, physical letters versus emails and things like that. And now it almost seems like a very old-fashioned thing with letters, or to sit down and write a letter. But, they seem to still be around. You find them tucked in library books or, boxes when someone passes. And, we think that we regard them a little differently than we do our emails. And, it just seems to me that people seem very protective if they have letters over the physical letter, if something happens to it when they're no longer around versus, oh yeah, get in my email, whatever.
Yeah.
Is it that fascinates you about letters, and do you think, what do you think about them in that regard? Do we sort of disregard the digital and sort of still uphold that tangible piece of paper more? And what kind of, what's the allure to that physical letter and envelope?
To me, the thing with letters, and I mean, I've had this experience too. I don't know if other people on the call have, of finding a letter that is like an old family letter. Like I found love letters from my grandparents, and old letters that I wrote to people, or people wrote to me, and those become really treasured. But I agree with you that email is not the same. It's just not, I think it's more of a stressful thing with email, because when you're in your computer, there's so many distractions. I am a letter writer, so I still write letters, and I still receive letters, and I love writing and receiving letters. And I feel like for me, at least, the kind of poetry of sitting down and like taking out a nice piece of paper and like a nice pen and giving that your full concentration, it's very different than an email. And I think with letters too, what you're writing can outlive you. And that's not something I think that will happen with email, just because there's so many emails coming all the time. There's so much junk. There's just so much that's being like barfed online, basically, that I don't think it will have the same staying power as, finding a physical letter.
Just a reminder, everyone, if you have a question, you can either type it in the chat or you can raise your hand, and Allie will recognize you. Allie, do we have anybody with a question yet?
Not as of now, no.
Got it. So, Lindsey, this is your first book. How long did it take you, process-wise, to get from your inspiration, your idea, to your physical book that we now have in front of us?
It took a long time. So when I started the book, I didn't really admit to myself that I was starting a book. I didn't really set out to write a book. I'm pretty open about this in the acknowledgments of the book and at the back of the book, but it was partially inspired, at least the beginning was, by a loss in my own family, and a loss from drug addiction, just like how Rob dies in the book. So kind of like when I sat down to write, I was sitting down and I wrote that funeral scene. That's still the first chapter of the book. And it was kind of like almost like a way of processing for me. And then it just kind of grew and grew and grew, and the characters all developed a mind of their own. And then eventually it was a book. But the whole process was about 4 years. So it was definitely a lot. I think I wrote probably 3 or 4 books and deleted 3 or 4 books from the draft. It could have gone a lot of different ways.
See, now had you handwritten those on legal pads, you could have stuck them in a drawer, and then when the publisher goes, "Do you have anything else?" you just pulled one of those right out.
I still have some, so we'll see. I still do some of my writing longhand, so somewhere in the apartment.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Allie says that we have a hand up, so.
Yes, Eliana?
Yeah, I had 2 questions. I was wondering if, like, when you're reading back through the book, do you remember writing, like, that page, or, like, where you were when you wrote that page, or, like, stories behind each page that you wrote, or do you not remember that?
That's a good question. No one's ever asked me that before. I think it can be both. So for some of the pages, I can remember what I was doing, especially some of the more emotional parts of the book. I have a habit of kind of skipping over some of the emotional parts until I feel emotionally ready, which I did for my last book and for the book I'm currently writing. So some of the end scenes, I can like really remember like what I was doing, where I was, what was going on in my life at that moment. For other parts, it kind of seems like even like a stranger wrote them. So one thing that I struggled with a lot was how to end the book. So I always knew what the last letter that Alice delivers would be, like even from my very first draft. But I wasn't sure what would happen after. And I think that as a writer, sometimes you even start like mentally blocking the amount of revision that you do. So when I would read the book back to myself through the drafts, I would even like forget what the ending was sometimes and have to remind myself.
Thank you.
Can you tell us what your new book is about? I was hoping for a sequel to the first book to find out if Jake and Alice were together. Well, spoiler alert. My second book is set in Memphis, and it's not connected to the first book at all, but it's going to be kind of similar themes. So it's about a rootless linguist who returns to her hometown of Memphis, Tennessee, and she's told that she'll get a page of her mother's diary for every day she stays. And her mother is dead, and there's a lot of like trauma there. So it's not connected to the first book, but I could definitely see myself revisiting some of the characters at some point. My earlier drafts had a lot more about Alice's mother, Mara, and I still think she's a really interesting character, and I would love to give her story more room.
Well, Lindsey, and with having so many authors on our stage over the years, one of the things when folks ask questions like that is, when you do your editing process, how do you do that? And, were there darlings that you had to kill or told that you had to kill in this process? And did you fight for any of them with your editor?
No, I mean, I think that the good thing about, I love my editor, and I think the great thing is that, like, she chose me, she chose my book, and like I chose her, and it's a great match. I definitely had people along the way who I came into contact with who read the book and had strong opinions that I disagreed with. I remember early on when I was first writing that a lot of people said, like, not a lot of people, but some editors told me, like, it's too depressing to start with the funeral. Like, no one's gonna read a book that starts with the funeral. And I, like, very strongly felt that that had to be the beginning of the book, and kept that, and I'm glad that I did. But yeah, I think that you always have to kill your darlings. I am currently doing the edit on my second book, and I'm having to kill my darlings a lot. And there was, I think, like 2 chapters of the first book that I cut at the end, and it was like very painful. But ultimately, I think the book is better for it. And I think as a journalist too, like I'm so used to being edited that I don't take it personally. And I think that like I really value being edited.
Speaking of you being a journalist, what is your process like? Do you, what is your daily writing routine? Do you get up? Do you write for a couple hours? Do you constantly have a notebook with you in case inspiration strikes? How do you do it? And as a working journalist who's probably very, very busy dealing with the pandemic that we're having right now, how do you manage the time to finish this book, do press for this book, get that new book, get it edited because it's coming out next summer regardless?
Yeah, it's been really hard with the pandemic and the press for this book and the second book. I think that one time I took a writing class where some writers were like in a room together complaining about their book deals, and J. Courtney Sullivan was teaching the class, and she said, no whining on the yacht. Like, you can't whine if you're like already up in the upper echelon of having a book contract. So I tell myself that a lot. I'm just like I'm lucky enough to have a book coming out, even if it's during a global pandemic, and I'm lucky enough to have a second book that I've already sold, even if I had to write it kind of like stealing pockets from covering everything that is going on right now in the world. I think in some ways it's good though, because then when I'm not working, I don't feel like I just need to sit at my desk and read the news. Like, I can actually like dive into my story where, you know, it happens pre the virus. All the characters are blissfully unaware of the trauma that has befallen us. In terms of my process, I am a big notebook toter. So I bring a notebook around everywhere, and then I have hundreds and hundreds of note cards around my apartment. So every time I hear like a bit of dialogue or something like that, or someone tells me a funny joke, like I write it down and I keep it. And then I just flip through the note cards when I need some inspiration. I'm a big eavesdropper. Always fun to hear what other people are talking about, and I get great ideas that way.
Well, now that's really interesting that you said that, because that's going to lead into this other question I have. Because, you know, Terry Jones, when she was writing American Marriage, that was her thing, that she overheard that conversation at Lenox Mall in the food court, and it just spiraled into this book. So it sounds to me like, you know, you have a voice inspiration and a place inspiration, because, you know, set in Georgia, the next one's set in Memphis, but, you know, you like eavesdropping. What is more important to you, or what is the greater draw? The voice that you hear, or is it the place that would set it off?
I feel like the voices that draw my interest are so intertwined with place. Like, I think with Georgia, like what you hear in different parts of Georgia is even like so different. Versus like Memphis, it's the same way. I think that when I'm deciding what to write about, the main thing that draws me in is the relationships between the characters. So if I'm somewhere and I hear someone having a conversation, I'm like, what's their deal? And I just start thinking about, you know, what their background could be. I used to go on a lot of business trips for work to DC, and I would eat a lot of meals by myself at like DC restaurants. And that was so fun, just sitting in DuPont Circle and like listening to everyone talking around me. I had like my notebook out. One time I was listening to a woman meet her future in-laws for the first time, and they started having a political discussion, and it was so uncomfortable. And it's just like, at times you just want to walk up to people and be like, I see you. Like, I'm sorry. But yeah, I've also heard that from Tari Jones, and if anyone hasn't read that book, I highly recommend it. It also has letters in it. It's fantastic.
So I dare say that, you know, because you have a book in Georgia and Memphis, you're gonna get lumped in with all the great Georgian writers now. So, you know, just get used to the giant Southern writer sorority that you're going to be inducted into. But who inspires you when you read? When you get the, you know, opportunity to read for leisure time and not just for work and things like that, you know, who do you look to for inspiration, or say, that's what I want to do?
Yeah, so I read a ton. I think I read last year like 100 books, and so I read like a book a week at least. And I think that the thing that's most inspiring to me is like new voices, new stories I haven't heard. It's always fun to dive into a writer where you kind of know what you're going to get, and that's exactly what you want. Like, I've read all of Sarah Addison Allen's books, and I love them, just like diving into that and just like diving into like the magical mystery of it all. But yeah, I get my recommendations from everywhere. So right now I'm reading The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, and I'm loving it. It's a story about two twin sisters, and they kind of grow up in this really small town and decide to run away from the town at age 16, and then they lose touch, and it's kind of like about how their lives later intersect. And then the last book that I read was Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed, and that book I also highly recommend. I have some of my favorite books back here. So Pat Conroy is a favorite Southern author. Obviously, Patty Callahan Henry and Mary King Andrews, Chrissy Woodson Harvey, just like all the people who kind of paved the way for Southern writing. But I think one thing that I have tried to do with my first book, and I'd like to continue doing, is just kind of like push back a little bit on the tropes of Southern writing. Like Alice, for example, is a water conservationalist, whereas like a lot of times in typical Southern writing, you know, the main character is like a cupcake baker or whatever. And like there's a main character of the book who's gay, and it's like not the central theme of the book. It's just like a fact. And I love reading books about places and people that I don't have experience with. So, I mean, I think just right now with everything going on in the world, where a lot of us are seeking different perspectives through books. And for me, that's how I learn best as well. So that's one thing I'm doing, is trying to read more Black authors right now too.
Excellent. Excellent advice too. So, and Allie just said that there's one more question from raised hands.
Eliana remembered her second question, so we have another.
I was wondering if the books that you read are if they're similar to the books that you write, or if they're different.
Yeah. So I'm not a huge like science fiction reader or fantasy reader, although sometimes I do read those. I love books about family secrets. So I think in that way, the books that I read are somewhat similar, but I like reading books that are different too. And family secrets is such a broad umbrella. Earlier in the summer, I read the book My Sister, the Serial Killer, which is about two sisters. One of them is a serial killer. And so it's obviously about family secrets, the secret of being related to a serial killer. But it's totally different than anything I would ever write. And that's what made it so fun to read. I accept book recommendations from all corners of the internet if anyone wants to add some.
You should read Monday's Not Coming. Have you read that before?
No.
Oh, it's kind of like there's a lot of family secrets and like, well, kind of like, yeah, and in between friends also. It's really good.
I'm writing that down. Thank you.
There's actually one I have to start into. Terry Jones recommended it. She wrote the foreword for it. It's called The Street by Anne Perry. Takes place during the Harlem Renaissance, and the bookstore in Augusta, the Book Tavern, always keeps it on hand, and it, you know, just seems so intriguing, and it's on my to-read pile.
I added it to my list.
There you go.
I'll more recommendations.
It's one of those things where it's like that, you know, you have one to read pile, and then you notice, oh, you know, you have another end table on the other side of your bed. So we're just going to make another 2-read pile over there. And you know, I guess that's the benefits of being single. Both of the end tables are yours for 2-read piles. So, you know.
I started with like, I think 3 or 4 books on a side table that I was going to read. I used to be really great at it. And then in the last year and a half, I recently counted and I have 120 unread books in my house. So they're just piling up.
You know, one of the great quotes that I always tell folks when I first started into college and I was taking a children's literature class, and Dr. Barry Ward, who was teaching the children's class, said, "You will never read all of the books you own before you die, but you will die knowing you own them." I'm going with that.
I was trying to see if I have swimming lessons. Oh, here. This book, which I love, Swimming Lessons by Claire Fuller. In this book, one of the main characters hoards books, and it's just like his house is, you can't even see the walls because the books are just stacked up. And it also has letters, and the main character's mother abandoned the family, but before she did, she slipped letters into some of the thousands and thousands of books in the house. So now he has to frantically search through all the books to find them.
Oh, wow. That sounds truly fascinating. Now, are there letters in your new book as well?
There are not letters, but there is the diary entries that she's getting. So it's still kind of like the element of the written word.
Well, does anyone else have any questions to ask Lindsey while we still have her on the call this evening?
Or book recommendations.
Yeah. It's almost like a very friendly author talk book club that we have going on.
I mean, anytime you want to operationalize that, I'm there.
It's like future book club. It's like, this is book club ideas book club.
Yes, it could go on.
Okay. Well, I don't see anyone chiming in. So as to not monopolize the rest of your evening, thank you so much, Lindsey, for sharing your time with us tonight. It was absolutely delightful. I hope that you all, if you haven't already picked up a copy of How to Bury Your Brother, do so either from Eagle Eye Books, who has copies in stock, or any of your local independent bookstores. During this time, we've been sending everyone to their independent bookstores who've been doing such a great job mailing books out to folks, doing curbside pickup. I know some of our bookstores, even here in Atlanta, have been doing delivery to folks' homes by themselves. It's just such a wonderful way that our bookstores are really giving back to the community, really supporting our authors. And we just ask that you consider supporting them as well. And if you do have in your neighborhood and you have the ability to support a Black-owned bookstore, there are so few of those out there, and they are doing such good work, and they deserve our support just like the rest of our independent bookstores do as well. So thank you so much for letting us into your homes this evening. We hope to see you very, very soon. Thank you, Lindsey, for being a wonderful author and sharing all of these insights with us. I hope you do well and you stay well and stay safe. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.